My name is Sophia Martinez, and this is how I discovered that being thrown out of my own home in a violent rage would become the best thing that ever happened to me. The night my husband Marcus screamed at me to get out and never come back, hurling my suitcase down the front steps of our Victorian house in Millbrook Heights, he had no idea that just hours earlier I had become worth $12 million. His fury that night would cost him everything, and I was about to make sure he understood exactly what he'd lost. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. It all began on what should have been a day of quiet celebration. I had just returned from the law offices of Hartwell, Kingston Associates in downtown Millbrook, where Attorney Patricia Hartwell had delivered news that still felt surreal. My great-aunt Vivian Rosewood, a woman I'd met only twice in my 32 years, had passed away 3 weeks prior and left me her entire estate, $12.4 million to be exact, along with properties in 3 states and a collection of rare art that Patricia estimated was worth another $2 million. She followed your life from afar, Patricia had explained, sliding the inheritance documents across her mahogany desk. Your aunt never married, never had children. She was impressed by your resilience, particularly how you put yourself through nursing school while working 2 jobs. She wanted her legacy to go to someone who understood the value of hard work and independence. I had sat in that leather chair, hands trembling as I processed the magnitude of what had just happened. $12 million. The number felt abstract, impossible. I, Sophia Martinez, who had been clipping coupons just that morning and calculating whether we could afford to repair our 10-year-old Honda Civic, was suddenly wealthier than I had ever imagined possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the past 8 years of marriage to Marcus Valamont, I had endured constant criticism about money. As a registered nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, I earned a respectable salary, but it was never enough for Marcus. He worked in commercial real estate development, and while his income was higher than mine, his spending was astronomical. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, the latest technology. Marcus believed he deserved the finer things in life, even if it meant we lived paycheck to paycheck. If you were more ambitious, he would say during our financial arguments, maybe we wouldn't be struggling like this. Look at Trevor's wife. She's a pharmaceutical sales rep making 6 figures. Why couldn't you have chosen a more lucrative career? These conversations had become increasingly frequent over the past year. Marcus had grown more volatile, more critical, more demanding. He wanted us to upgrade to a larger house in the exclusive Elmwood district, drive luxury cars, vacation in Europe. When I suggested we needed to build our savings first, he would explode into rages that left me walking on eggshells for days. The day I received my inheritance, I had planned to tell Marcus about Aunt Vivian's gift over a quiet dinner at home. I had stopped at Romano's Delicatessen on Maple Street to pick up his favorite Italian sandwiches, imagining his reaction when I shared the incredible news. For once, all his dreams of luxury and status would be within reach. For once, I would be the solution to our problems instead of the source of his frustration. But when I walked through the front door of our house on Rosewood Lane at 6:30 that evening, Marcus was already in the middle of one of his moods. He was pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, voice raised in anger as he spoke to someone about a failed deal and incompetent investors. I set the food on the kitchen counter and waited, knowing better than to interrupt when he was this agitated. Through the archway, I could see him gesticulating wildly, his face flushed with rage. Marcus was a handsome man, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of sharp features that had initially attracted me when we met at a hospital charity gala 9 years ago. But when he was angry, his good looks twisted into something ugly and intimidating. When he finally ended the call, he turned to me with eyes blazing. "The Peterson project fell through," he announced, as if it were somehow my fault. 6 months of work down the drain because some environmental inspector found issues with the proposed site. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, approaching with the sandwich bags. "I brought dinner from Romano's. Your favorite—" "I don't want a sandwich, Sophia," he exploded, swiping the bags from my hands and sending them flying across the kitchen floor. "I want solutions. I want a wife who supports my ambitions instead of just accepting mediocrity." The familiar knot formed in my stomach. Here we were again, another evening ruined by his inability to control his temper. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I had 12 million reasons to feel differently about his abuse. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I have something important to tell you, something that might change everything." But he wasn't listening. He never listened when he was in this state. Instead, he continued his tirade, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "You know what I need, Sophia? I need a partner, not a burden. I need someone who brings value to this relationship instead of just—" He waved his hand dismissively at me. This ordinary life you're so content with." The words stung, but they also crystallized something inside me. Ordinary. After 8 years of marriage, after supporting his dreams and enduring his criticism, that's how he saw me. Ordinary. Little did he know that the ordinary woman standing before him had just become one of the wealthiest people in Millbrook. "If you would just listen for one moment," I tried again, my voice firmer now. "I received news today that—" "I don't want to hear about your day," he roared. "I don't want to hear about difficult patients or hospital politics or whatever other mundane drama fills your ordinary little world." And that's when something inside me snapped. The inheritance documents were in my purse, just 10 feet away. Proof that I was worth more than he could possibly imagine. But suddenly, I didn't want to share that news with him. Suddenly, I wanted to see exactly how far his cruelty would go. "You're right, Marcus," I said quietly. "My life is very ordinary." The calmness in my voice seemed to infuriate him even more. His face grew redder, his movements more erratic. And then he said the words that would change both our lives forever, though he wouldn't understand their true cost until it was far too late. "You know what, Sophia? I'm done. I'm done with this mediocre life. Done with your lack of ambition. Done with pretending that this is enough for me." What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that Marcus could never have anticipated. Because sometimes, the universe has a twisted sense of humor. And sometimes, the person you underestimate the most is the one holding all the cards. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. What happened next unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion, each moment searing itself into my memory with brutal clarity. Marcus stood in our living room, his chest heaving with rage, eyes wild with a fury I'd never seen before. The failed Peterson project had been his big break, the deal that was supposed to elevate him from a mid-level commercial realtor to a major player in Millbrook's development scene. Now that it had crumbled, he needed someone to blame, and I was the most convenient target. "I said I'm done, Sophia," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls of our carefully decorated home. "Done with this pathetic excuse for a life we're living." I stood frozen by the kitchen counter, my purse containing the inheritance documents just inches away, watching my husband of 8 years transform into someone I barely recognized. His usually perfect hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, his expensive dress shirt wrinkled and partially untucked. But it was his eyes that frightened me most. They held a coldness I'd never seen directed at me before. "Marcus, please, just calm down and let me—" "Don't tell me to calm down." He spun toward me, his movement so sudden and aggressive that I instinctively took a step back. "You want to know what your problem is, Sophia? You have no vision, no drive. You're perfectly content being mediocre for the rest of your life." The irony of his words hit me like a physical blow. If only he knew that the mediocre woman he was screaming at had just inherited more money than he would likely earn in 10 lifetimes. But something held me back from revealing the truth. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was self-preservation, or maybe, deep down, I needed to see exactly who my husband really was when he thought I had nothing. "I work 60-hour weeks at the hospital," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "I've never complained about your spending or your dreams. I've supported you through every—" "Supported me?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "You call earning a nurse's salary support? Do you know what Trevor's wife brings to their marriage? She's a powerhouse in pharmaceuticals, pulling in $200,000 a year. They just bought a house in Elmwood District for $800,000. I felt the familiar sting of being compared to Trevor's wife, Cassandra. Marcus had been obsessed with their lifestyle for months, constantly measuring our life against theirs and finding us lacking. What he didn't know was that I could now buy 10 houses in Elmwood District without even denting my inheritance. "Money isn't everything, Marcus," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. That's when he exploded. "Money isn't everything?" He moved toward me with a predatory stride that made my heart race with fear. "Easy to say when you've never had any real ambition. You're holding me back, Sophia. You're an anchor dragging me down to your level of mediocrity. Is got?" Words were like daggers, each one precisely aimed to wound. But beneath the hurt, something else was growing. A cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. "I've given you 8 years of my life," I said quietly, my hand unconsciously moving toward my purse. 8 years of supporting your dreams, working extra shifts to help pay for your designer clothes and expensive dinners. And this is how you see me? "I see you exactly as you are," he snarled, now standing just a few feet away. "A small-town nurse with small-town dreams who's too scared to reach for anything better. You want to know the truth? I'm embarrassed by you, Sophia. Embarrassed to introduce you to important clients. Embarrassed by your lack of sophistication. Embarrassed by your complete inability to elevate yourself." The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. In that moment, I saw our entire marriage clearly for the first time. Every late dinner when he'd criticized my appearance before meeting his colleagues. Every social gathering where he'd steered conversations away from my work as if nursing was something shameful. Every financial argument where he'd made me feel guilty for not earning more while he spent money we didn't have. "I want a divorce," he said suddenly, the words falling like hammer blows. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that this ordinary life is enough for me." I stared at him, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos unfolding around me. "You want a divorce?" "Yes." Finally, she understands something. He threw his hands up in mock celebration. "I want out, Sophia. I want to find someone who can actually contribute to building the life I deserve." That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of reaching for my purse, instead of pulling out the inheritance documents that would have ended this conversation immediately, I simply nodded. "Okay," I said quietly. He stopped pacing, apparently not expecting such easy agreement. "Okay? If that's what you want, Marcus. If you think I'm holding you back, then maybe we should separate." Something flickered across his face, confusion, maybe even disappointment that I wasn't fighting for our marriage. But his rage quickly reasserted itself. "Good. Finally. You can pack a bag and stay at your sister Elena's place while we figure out the details. I'll need time to think about how to divide our assets fairly." Our assets. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Marcus was already calculating how to split our modest savings, our 10-year-old car, our small house with its manageable mortgage. He had no idea that the woman he was dismissing as ordinary could now buy his entire real estate development company without breaking a sweat. "I'll pack tonight," I agreed, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. But Marcus wasn't done. The temporary satisfaction of having controlled the situation seemed to fuel his anger rather than diminish it. "You know what really kills me, Sophia. You could have been more. You could have gone back to school, gotten an advanced degree, specialized in something lucrative. But no, you were content to stay exactly where you were, accepting whatever life handed you." I looked at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. Saw his entitlement, his cruelty, his complete inability to value anything that didn't serve his own ambitions. And I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pity. "You're right, Marcus," I said softly. "I did accept what life handed me. And you'll never know how much that's going to cost you." He frowned, clearly not understanding the meaning behind my words. But he would. Soon enough, he would understand exactly what he'd thrown away in his rage-fueled tantrum. "Whatever that's supposed to mean," he muttered, turning away dismissively. "Just pack your things and go. I need space to think about my future. My real future." As I walked toward our bedroom to pack, leaving my purse and its life-changing contents, behind on the kitchen counter, I couldn't help but smile. Marcus thought he was getting rid of a burden. He thought he was freeing himself from mediocrity. What he had actually done was throw away $12 million and the woman who might have shared it all with him. But he would learn that soon enough. And I was going to make sure the lesson was one he'd never forget. The packing process felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart in slow motion. I moved through our bedroom mechanically, folding clothes into my old college suitcase while Marcus continued his tirade from downstairs. His voice carried up through the hardwood floors, a constant stream of complaints about our failed marriage and his wasted years. As I packed, the full weight of what had just happened began to settle in. 8 years of marriage ended in a 15-minute explosion of rage. But what struck me most wasn't the sadness I expected to feel. It was the clarity. For the first time in years, I could see our relationship without the fog of hope and denial that had clouded my judgment. I was folding my nursing scrubs when Marcus appeared in the doorway, his anger having evolved into something more calculated and cold. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, "about the house, our savings, all of it. We need to be smart about this division." I continued packing without looking at him. "What do you mean?" "Well, let's be realistic here, Sophia. I've been the primary breadwinner for most of our marriage. My income secured the mortgage, my credit score got us approved for the loan. It only makes sense that I keep the house." I paused, a sweater halfway into my suitcase. "We bought this house together, Marcus. Both our names are on the deed." "Technically, yes," he said, his tone taking on that patronizing quality I'd come to hate. "But practically speaking, my salary of $95,000 versus your $68,000 means I've contributed significantly more to our lifestyle. Any reasonable divorce mediator would see that." The numbers he quoted were accurate, but they told only part of the story. What he conveniently ignored was that I'd worked double shifts for 3 years to help save for our down payment. He also forgot about the $40,000 I'd inherited from my father 5 years ago. Money that had gone directly into home improvements and paying down our mortgage principal. "I put my father's inheritance into this house," I reminded him quietly. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. $40,000 over 5 years ago? That barely covers the kitchen renovation I designed and managed. Face it, Sophia. Without my vision and financial contribution, this place would still look like the dated disaster it was when we bought it. His revision of history was breathtaking. The kitchen renovation had been my idea, something I'd researched and planned for months. Marcus had simply written the checks and taken credit for the final result. But I didn't argue. Let him think he'd contributed more than he had. His arrogance would serve my purposes perfectly. "And our savings account," he continued, warming to his theme. The $32,000 we have saved should be divided proportionally based on our income contributions. So I'd be entitled to about $20,000 and you'd get $12,000. I almost laughed. $32,000. Marcus was dividing up our modest savings with the precision of someone handling a fortune, completely unaware that I could now earn that amount in investment interest in a single day. "Is that what you think is fair?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "More than fair," he said, clearly pleased with his mathematical generosity. "A lot of men in my position would argue for keeping everything, given that I'll be the one maintaining the mortgage payments and property taxes. And what about my car?" "Your car?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Sophia, that Honda has 130,000 miles on it. It's worth maybe $5,000 on a good day. You can keep it, obviously. I'm not going to fight you over a decade-old economy car." The condescension in his voice was extraordinary. He was treating me like a charity case, graciously allowing me to keep my worthless vehicle while he retained everything of real value. If only he knew that I could now buy a fleet of luxury cars without giving it a second thought. "There's also the matter of your credit cards," he continued, pulling out his phone as if consulting notes. "You have about $8,000 in credit. Card debt, mostly from that shopping spree you went on last Christmas." I stared at him. "That shopping spree was buying gifts for your entire family, plus the expensive watch you insisted on getting for your boss. The point is, that debt is in your name. I can't be responsible for your financial decisions during our marriage." His ability to rewrite history was stunning. Every purchase I'd made had been discussed with him, most of it at his suggestion or outright demand. The Christmas gifts, the expensive dinners he'd insisted on, the designer clothes he'd claimed, were necessary for my image. All of it was somehow now my financial irresponsibility. "I think," he said, putting his phone away with the air of someone concluding a successful business negotiation, "what I'm offering here is extremely reasonable. You get to walk away with your car, $12,000 in cash, and a clean slate to build whatever small life makes you happy." A clean slate. The phrase echoed in my mind as I looked at this man I'd loved for nearly a decade. He was offering me scraps from the table of my own life and acting like he was being generous. He thought he was setting me free to live some diminished version of existence while he kept everything we'd built together. "And if I don't agree to these terms?" I asked, genuinely curious about how far his arrogance extended. Marcus's expression hardened. "Then we do this the difficult way. I hire a lawyer, we drag this out for months, and you end up with even less after legal fees eat into everything. Trust me, Sophia, I know people in this town. Good lawyers, influential lawyers. You'd be fighting with a public defender against some of the sharpest legal minds in Millbrook." There it was, the threat wrapped in a veneer of reasonableness. Marcus was counting on my supposed lack of resources and connections to force me into accepting his insulting offer. He expected me to be intimidated by his professional network, cowed by the prospect of expensive legal battles I couldn't afford. "I've also been thinking about the timeline," he continued, his confidence growing with each word. "I need you out by tomorrow evening. I'm having Trevor and Cassandra over for dinner this weekend, and I'd prefer not to have to explain why my estranged wife is still living here. It would be awkward for everyone." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. He was already planning dinner parties with the couple he'd spent months using to make me feel inadequate, treating our separation like a minor inconvenience in his social calendar. "Tomorrow?" I said. "Marcus, that's less than 24 hours. It's plenty of time to pack your personal belongings. Elena said you could stay with her temporarily, right? This doesn't have to be complicated, Sophia. You take what's yours, I keep what's mine, and we both move on with our lives. What's mine versus what's his." In Marcus's mind, 8 years of marriage had been reduced to a simple calculation where his contributions vastly outweighed mine. He was convinced that his higher salary and professional connections entitled him to nearly everything, while I should be grateful for whatever scraps he was willing to throw my way. "I need time to think about all this," I said carefully, closing my suitcase and lifting it off the bed. "What's to think about?" Marcus asked, his impatience showing. "I'm offering you a generous settlement that avoids a messy court battle. Most women in your position would jump at the chance to end things amicably. Most women in my position." The "she" phrase revealed everything about how he saw me, as someone without options, without resources, without the means to fight back against his demands. He was counting on my supposed weakness, my financial dependence, my lack of powerful connections. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, Marcus following behind me like a supervisor ensuring I didn't take anything that wasn't rightfully mine, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. His arrogance was complete now, his true character fully revealed. The caring husband I thought I'd married had been an illusion, a mask he'd worn until he no longer needed my approval or support. "I'll call you tomorrow about the paperwork," he said as I reached the front door. "The sooner we get this finalized, the sooner we can both start our new lives." I turned to look at him one last time. This man who thought he was discarding a burden while actually throwing away a fortune. The inheritance documents were still in my purse, the secret that could change everything still unspoken. "You're absolutely right, Marcus," I said softly. "The sooner we get this finalized, the better it will be for both of us." He smiled then, clearly satisfied with how efficiently he'd handled the dissolution of our marriage. He thought he'd maneuvered me into accepting his terms through a combination of financial intimidation and emotional manipulation. He had no idea that he'd just revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person who deserved to lose everything as... I walked to my car, suitcase in hand. I was already planning my next move. Marcus wanted to play hardball, assuming I had no power to fight back. He was about to learn just how wrong that assumption was, and I was going to enjoy every moment of his education. I drove to my sister Elena's apartment in Riverside Commons, with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The 20-minute drive gave me time to process what had just happened, and with each mile, my shock was transforming into something far more dangerous. Cold, calculated fury. Elena lived in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment overlooking Millbrook River, a space she'd decorated with the warm, eclectic style that perfectly reflected her personality as an art teacher at Riverside Elementary. When she opened the door and saw my suitcase and expression, she immediately pulled me into a fierce hug. "What happened?" she asked, leading me inside. "You sounded strange on the phone." I set my suitcase down in her living room and collapsed onto her oversized sectional sofa. The inheritance documents were still in my purse, the secret burning inside me like a live coal. But I needed to process Marcus's betrayal first, needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, before I revealed my ace in the hole. "Marcus asked for a divorce," I said simply. Elena's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, concern, and then something that looked almost like relief. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, but are you okay? I mean, really okay?" I studied my sister's face. Elena had never liked Marcus, though she'd been diplomatic about it over the years. She was 2 years younger than me, but often seemed wiser about people and relationships. Her question told me she'd seen something in my marriage that I'd been too close to notice. "I think I'm more okay than I should be," I admitted. "Elena, the things he said to me tonight, I don't think I ever really knew who I married." Over the next hour, I told her everything. Marcus's rage about the failed Peterson project, his cruel words about my mediocrity, his arrogant demands about the divorce settlement. Elena listened, without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. 68,000 versus 95,000, she repeated when I finished. So he thinks that $27,000 difference entitles him to everything? Sophia, you worked double shifts for 3 years to save for that house down payment. You put your father's entire inheritance into that home. He's already rewritten that history, I said bitterly. According to Marcus, my contributions were negligible compared to his vision and financial leadership. Elena stood up abruptly and began pacing her small living room. This is insane. He can't just decide unilaterally how your assets get divided. You have rights, Sophia. You have legal protections. He's counting on me not knowing that, I said, or not being able to afford to fight him. He specifically mentioned hiring expensive lawyers and having influential connections. Well, he's wrong about that, Elena said firmly. I know someone who can help. Remember my friend Carmen Rodriguez from college? She's a divorce attorney now, one of the best in the state. She handled my friend Janet's divorce last year and absolutely destroyed her cheating ex-husband in court. This was the moment. I could continue pretending to be the helpless victim. Marcus thought I was, or I could reveal the truth that would change everything. I reached into my purse and pulled out the inheritance documents, my hands trembling slightly as I held them out to Elena. Before you call anyone, I said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. Elena took the papers, frowning as she scanned the first page. I watched her eyes widen as she processed what she was reading. She looked up at me, then back at the documents, then at me again. $12.4 million? She whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make the numbers disappear. Great-aunt Vivian Rosewood. I inherited everything this morning. Elena sank back onto the sofa, the papers clutched in her hands. This morning, you've been worth $12 million since this morning? And Marcus kicked you out tonight? He has no idea. I tried to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. He was too busy explaining how ordinary and worthless I am. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena stared at the documents, then at me, then started laughing. Not happy laughter, but the kind of hysterical laughter that comes when reality becomes too absurd to process normally. He threw away $12 million, she said between gasps. $12 million, because he thinks you're not ambitious. Enough. And properties in 3 states, I added. Plus an art collection worth another $2 million. Elena's laughter stopped abruptly. Sophia, do you understand what this means? You don't have to accept anything he's offering. You could buy his entire real estate company. You could buy the house he's trying to steal from you 10 times over. The full implications were starting to sink in. Marcus thought he held all the cards, the higher income, the professional connections, the legal intimidation tactics. He was planning to steamroll me in divorce proceedings, confident that I lacked the resources to fight back effectively. He had no idea that I now possessed more wealth than anyone in his precious social circle. What are you going to do? Elena asked, her voice hushed with anticipation. I thought about Marcus's smug expression as he'd outlined his generous settlement offer. His casual cruelty in demanding I be gone by tomorrow evening so he could host dinner parties without the awkwardness of explaining my presence. His absolute certainty that I would meekly accept whatever scraps he was willing to offer. I'm going to call Carmen Rodriguez, I said, my voice steady and cold. And then I'm going to make sure Marcus understands exactly what he threw away tonight. Elena grinned, the expression transforming her face. This is going to be beautiful. Carmen is going to love this case. But first, I continued, I need to be smart about this. Marcus is expecting me to react emotionally, to either beg him for reconciliation or crumble under the pressure of his demands. Instead, I'm going to let him think he's winning right up until the moment his world falls apart. I spent the next 2 hours strategizing with Elena. We called Carmen Rodriguez, who agreed to meet with me first thing in the morning despite her busy schedule. Elena had explained just enough about the situation to pique Carmen's interest without revealing the inheritance bombshell. She sounded excited, Elena reported after hanging up. I think she enjoys cases where the underdog has a chance to win big. We also discussed the timeline. Marcus wanted me out by tomorrow evening, expecting me to scramble for temporary housing, while he settled into his new life. Instead, I would use the time to gather evidence, meet with my attorney, and begin building a case that would leave him completely unprepared for what was coming. "What about telling him about the inheritance?" Elena asked. "When do you reveal that particular surprise?" I considered this carefully. Part of me wanted to call Marcus immediately, to hear the shock in his voice when he realized what he'd lost. But strategic thinking overruled emotional satisfaction. Not yet, I decided. Let him file for divorce first. Let him submit his insulting settlement proposal to the court. Let him get comfortable with the idea that he's outsmarted me. The bigger his arrogance grows, the more devastating it will be when reality hits. Elena nodded approvingly. Plus, if you wait until the legal proceedings begin, everything becomes part of the official record. His demands, his threats, his attempts to manipulate you, it all gets documented for the judge to see. As the evening wore on, my shock continued transforming into something more powerful. This wasn't just about the money, though having $12 million certainly changed the game dramatically. This was about justice. This was about making sure that Marcus's cruelty and manipulation had consequences he never saw coming. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said as we prepared for bed. All those times he made me feel small. All those comparisons to Trevor's wife and her pharmaceutical career. All those lectures about my lack of ambition. He genuinely believed I was the problem in our marriage. "And now?" Elena asked. "Now I know exactly who the problem was, and I have the resources to make sure he pays for every moment of misery he put me through." As I settled into Elena's guest room that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about the future. Tomorrow would begin the process of reclaiming not just my assets, but my dignity. Marcus thought he'd discarded an obstacle to his happiness. Instead, he'd just awakened a force he was completely unprepared to face, and I was going to make sure the lesson was one he'd never forget. The inheritance documents lay on the nightstand beside me, proof that sometimes the universe has a perfect sense of timing. Marcus's greed and cruelty were about to cost him everything, and I was finally in a position to make sure justice was served with interest. The next morning, I woke before dawn with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Elena was already in the kitchen making coffee, her hair in a messy bun and her favorite ceramic mug, one painted by her third-grade students, warming in her hands. "Sleep well?" she asked, though my expression probably answered her question, like a rock, for the first time in months. I accepted the coffee she offered, savoring the rich Colombian blend that Elena always splurged on. "What time is the appointment with Carmen?" 9:30. Her office is downtown in the Meridian building. Elena studied my face. "You look different, calmer." I was different. Yesterday's emotional turmoil had crystallized overnight into something much more powerful: strategic determination. I had spent years walking on eggshells around Marcus's moods, years accepting his version of reality where I was the problem. Now, armed with both the truth about his character and the resources to fight back, I felt like I was finally operating from a position of strength. Carmen Rodriguez's law office occupied the entire 15th floor of Millbrook's most prestigious building. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, guided me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Carmen arrived moments later, a petite woman with silver-streaked hair, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Elena tells me you need help with a divorce situation," she said, settling across from me with a legal pad and an expensive-looking pen. But she was remarkably vague about the details. "The details are unusual," I began, then spent the next hour walking her through everything. Marcus's rage, his demands, his threats about expensive lawyers and influential connections. Carmen took notes throughout, occasionally asking pointed questions about our financial history and Marcus's behavior patterns. When I finished the basic story, Carmen set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Your husband sounds like a classic narcissistic manipulator. Unfortunately, cases like this are more common than you'd think. The good news is that his arrogance typically works against him in court. There's more, I said, pulling the inheritance documents from my purse. Something Marcus doesn't know about. Carmen's eyebrows rose as she scanned the paperwork. I watched her professional composure crack slightly as she processed the numbers. 12.4 million, she said slowly. Inherited yesterday morning, hours before he kicked you out. He has no idea. I tried to tell him, but he was too busy explaining how worthless I am. Carmen began laughing, not the hysterical laughter Elena had produced, but the delighted laughter of someone who'd just been handed an unwinnable case that had suddenly become a guaranteed victory. Mrs. Martinez, she said, her eyes sparkling. With anticipation, this might be the most satisfying case I've handled in 20 years. Your husband is about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating people. Over the next 2 hours, Carmen outlined our strategy. The key was documentation. Every conversation, every demand, every threat Marcus made needed to be recorded and preserved. We would let him file his divorce petition first, complete with his insulting settlement proposal, creating an official record of his greed and manipulation. The beauty of this situation, Carmen explained, is that his own arrogance will hang him. When he submits a settlement demand that gives you scraps while he keeps the house and most of the savings, it will demonstrate his fundamental misunderstanding of the law and his contempt for your contributions to the marriage. What about his threats regarding expensive lawyers? I asked. Carmen's smile turned predatory. I've been practicing divorce law in this city for 18 years. I know every expensive lawyer in town, and most of them owe me favors. Marcus's connections won't help him when the facts are this clear-cut. She opened her laptop and began pulling up information. Let's do some research on your husband's professional network, shall we? What we discovered over the next hour was fascinating. Marcus's claims about his influence and connections were largely overblown. The law firm he'd mentioned, Blackstone, Mitchell and Associates, was indeed prestigious, but Carmen had actually worked there early in her career and maintained excellent relationships with the partners. Jonathan Mitchell is my former mentor, she explained. If Marcus tries to hire them, I'll have a very interesting conversation with Jonathan about conflict of interest and professional ethics. But the real breakthrough came when Carmen started investigating Marcus's recent business activities. Using her access to public records and business filings, she uncovered information that made my inheritance seem like just the beginning of Marcus's problems. Your husband has been busier than you know, Carmen said, turning her laptop screen toward me. Look at this. The screen showed a series of business filings for something called Valamont Development LLC, established 3 months ago with Marcus as the sole owner. The company had received a substantial loan, $250,000, from Millbrook Commercial Bank. I don't understand, I said. Marcus never mentioned starting his own company. Because he was planning to use it as a vehicle to hide assets during your divorce, Carmen explained. This is a common tactic. He creates a business entity, moves money into it, then claims business debts and expenses to reduce his apparent net worth. She pulled up more documents. But here's where it gets interesting. The loan application for Valamont Development required a personal guarantee, backed by collateral. Guess what he used as collateral? My stomach sank. Our house. Your house? Carmen corrected with emphasis. The house you co-own. The house he put his father's inheritance into. The house he's now trying to claim as solely his. He pledged it as collateral without your knowledge or consent. The implications were staggering. Marcus hadn't just been planning to steal our marital assets in the divorce. He'd been actively leveraging our home to fund his secret business venture. If Valamont Development failed, we could lose everything. Is that legal? I asked. Absolutely not. Fraudulent transfer of marital assets. Forging spousal consent on loan documents. If he did what I think he did, he's committed multiple felonies. Carmen spent the next 30 minutes making phone calls, using her network of contacts to dig deeper into Marcus's financial activities. Each conversation revealed new layers of deception. The Peterson project that had failed wasn't actually dead. Marcus had secretly secured the contract through Valamont Development, cutting out his current employer and planning to claim the profits for himself. Your husband is either a criminal mastermind or an incredibly stupid criminal, Carmen observed after ending her final call. Based on what I know about him, I'm leaning toward the latter. We also discovered that Marcus had been meeting with divorce attorneys for weeks, shopping for someone willing to support his aggressive stance. He'd apparently been turned down by 3 firms before finding someone willing to take his case. A solo practitioner named Dale Ferguson with a reputation for taking ethically questionable positions. Ferguson, Carmen said with distaste. That explains a lot. He's the kind of lawyer who'll file anything for the right fee, ethics be damned. But the most shocking discovery came from Carmen's contact at the bank. The loan officer who'd approved Marcus's business financing was Trevor Hastings, the same Trevor whose wife Marcus had been comparing me to for months. It's all connected, Carmen explained. Marcus has been planning this for months, probably since he started his affair. Trevor's wife Cassandra works in pharmaceutical sales, but Trevor works in commercial lending. He's been feeding Marcus inside information about business opportunities and helping him secure financing. The web of deception was even more extensive than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal our assets while leaving me with nothing. His rage about my mediocrity had been projection, hiding his own criminal behavior behind accusations of my inadequacy. So what's our next move? I asked. Carmen's smile was absolutely terrifying in its predatory intensity. We let him hang himself. Every move he's made has been documented. Every illegal transaction has left a paper trail. We're going to gather every piece of evidence, then present it all at once in a way that destroys not just his divorce case, but potentially his freedom. She pulled out a calendar and began scheduling meetings. Tomorrow, we meet with a forensics accountant to trace every dollar. Wednesday, we file our own divorce petition with a complete financial disclosure that will make his head spin. Thursday, we request emergency asset protection to prevent him from hiding any more money. And when do we tell him about the inheritance? Carmen considered this. After he's committed to his ridiculous settlement proposal in court. I want his greed and contempt for you on the official record before we reveal that the ordinary woman he's dismissing is worth $14 million. As I left Carmen's office, I felt like I was walking on air. Marcus thought he'd outmaneuvered me, thought his network of cronies and criminal schemes would guarantee his victory. Instead, his arrogance and illegal activities had created a paper trail that would destroy him. The inheritance had given me the resources to fight back, but Marcus's own criminal behavior had given me the ammunition to win decisively. He'd spent months planning what he thought would be a perfect crime. Instead, he'd engineered his own destruction, and I had front-row seats to watch it all unfold. 3 days later, I sat in Conference Room A at the Millbrook County Courthouse, watching Marcus swagger through the doors with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He was dressed in his most expensive suit, the charcoal Armani he'd bought for closing the Riverside Plaza deal last year, and wore the smug expression I'd come to recognize whenever he felt he had the upper hand. Beside him walked Dale Ferguson, a thin man with nervous eyes and the kind of cheap suit that immediately marked him as someone operating outside the top tier of Millbrook's legal community. Carmen had done her research on Ferguson thoroughly, and the picture wasn't pretty. 3 ethics violations in the past 5 years, a reputation for taking cases other lawyers wouldn't touch, and a client base consisting primarily of men trying to hide assets from their wives. Marcus's eyes found mine across the conference table, and I saw a flicker of satisfaction cross his face. He thought I looked defeated, sitting there in my simple black dress with my modest jewelry. He had no idea that the ordinary woman he was preparing to steamroll was now worth more than everyone in this room combined. "Sophia," he said with false warmth as he took his seat. "You look tired. I hope you're getting enough rest at Elena's place." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. He was treating me like a wayward child who'd finally come to accept reality, grateful for whatever scraps he was willing to offer. Carmen entered the room at exactly 10 o'clock, her presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case she cared about winning, her leather briefcase containing enough evidence to destroy Marcus's entire world. "Mr. Ferguson," she said with professional courtesy that didn't quite hide her contempt, "I trust you've had time to review your client's settlement proposal." Ferguson shuffled through his papers nervously. "Yes, well, my client has been very generous in his offer. Mrs. Martinez should consider herself fortunate that Mr. Valamont is willing to settle amicably rather than pursue a lengthy court battle." Marcus leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying what he assumed would be my humiliation. "I think $12,000 plus the car is more than fair, considering the circumstances." I noticed he'd actually reduced his offer from the $12,000 we'd discussed at home. Carmen had warned me this might happen. Marcus would continue pushing boundaries to see how much he could get away with. "The circumstances," Carmen repeated, opening her briefcase with deliberate precision. "Yes, let's discuss the circumstances. Mr. Ferguson, I trust your client has provided you with complete financial disclosure for this proceeding?" "Of course," Ferguson said, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely certain. Carmen pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. "Excellent, because we've conducted our own financial investigation, and the results are quite illuminating." She opened the folder, revealing page after page of documents, bank records, and legal filings. Marcus's confident expression began to falter as he recognized some of the paperwork. "Let's start with Valamont Development LLC," Carmen continued conversationally. "A company your client established 3 months ago using our family home as collateral for a $250,000 business loan. A loan application that apparently bore Mrs. Martinez's forged signature." The color drained from Marcus's face. Ferguson looked confused, clearly seeing this information for the first time. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Really?" Carmen slid a document across the table. "Because here's your signature on the LLC formation papers, and here's the loan application with what purports to be your wife's consent. Interesting how her signature looks remarkably different from her actual signature on file with the bank," Ferguson was frantically whispering to Marcus, who was staring at the documents with growing panic. I remained silent, watching my husband realize that his carefully constructed lies were unraveling. "There's more," Carmen continued, clearly enjoying herself. "The Peterson project that allegedly fell through? Actually, it didn't fall through at all. Your client simply stole it from his employer by bidding on it through his secret company, using insider information provided by his friend Trevor Hastings at Millbrook Commercial Bank. That's not," Marcus stammered, but couldn't seem to complete the sentence. "Wire fraud, bank fraud, theft of trade secrets, fraudulent transfer of marital assets," Carmen listed methodically. "The FBI's white-collar crime division would be very interested in this pattern of behavior." Ferguson was sweating now, clearly realizing he'd been lied to by his client. "Mr. Valamont, you assured me that—" "Shut up, Dale!" Marcus snapped, his composure completely gone. Carmen pulled out another set of documents. "But the most interesting discovery came from our investigation into your attempts to hide marital assets. You see, While you were planning to steal Mrs. Martinez's share of your joint property, something happened that you're not aware of. She placed a single sheet of paper in front of Marcus. I watched his eyes scan the document, watched understanding dawn on his face like a slow-motion explosion. "This is a joke," he whispered. $12.4 million, Carmen said clearly. "Inherited by Mrs. Martinez the morning before you threw her out of the house, plus properties in Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida valued at an additional $3 million, and an art collection that Sotheby's has appraised at $2.1 million. The silence in the room was deafening. Ferguson's mouth was literally hanging open. Marcus stared at the inheritance documents as if they might spontaneously combust. "You're lying," Marcus finally managed. "This is fake. You're trying to—" "The inheritance was verified by 3 independent sources," Carmen interrupted, "including Hartwell, Kingston Associates, who handled the estate. Perhaps you'd like to call them to confirm?" I spoke for the first time since entering the room. "You threw away $17 million, Marcus, because you thought I wasn't ambitious." "Enough!" The devastation on his face was almost comical. I could see him frantically calculating what he'd lost, understanding for the first time that the mediocre woman he'd discarded was now wealthier than his wildest dreams. "This changes nothing," he said desperately. "The inheritance is hers, but our marital assets are still subject to division." "Actually," Carmen interjected, "given your fraudulent activities with marital property, Mrs. Martinez has grounds to claim that you forfeited any right to shared assets, but we're willing to be reasonable." She pulled out a final document. "Here's our settlement offer. Mrs. Martinez keeps the house, which will be immediately refinanced, to remove your fraudulent business loan. You keep your car, your clothes, and any debt associated with your criminal enterprise. In exchange, Mrs. Martinez agrees not to press charges for fraud, theft, and forgery." Marcus's face had gone from pale to greenish. "You can't be serious." "As serious as a federal indictment," Carmen replied cheerfully. "Which, by the way, is exactly what you'll be facing if you don't accept this offer. Trevor Hastings has already agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency. Apparently, he's not as loyal as you thought." Ferguson was gathering his papers frantically. "I need to withdraw from this case immediately. Mr. Valamont, you need different counsel." "Don't you dare leave," Marcus snarled, but Ferguson was already standing. "I don't represent criminals," Ferguson said, heading for the door. "Find yourself another lawyer." Marcus turned back to us, desperation replacing arrogance. "Sophia, be reasonable. We were married for 8 years. You can't just—" "I can't what?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. "I can't protect myself from a husband who forged my signature to steal our home. I can't demand justice when my spouse commits multiple felonies. I can't expect to keep my inheritance when you tried to leave me with nothing." The transformation was complete. The confident man who'd walked into this room expecting to claim victory was now a panicked criminal facing the destruction of everything he'd worked for. "You have 24 hours to accept our offer," Carmen said, standing to signal the meeting was over. "After that, we file criminal charges and you can explain your business practices to a federal prosecutor." As we gathered our papers to leave, Marcus made one last desperate attempt. "Sophia, please. I made mistakes, but we can work this out. Think about what we had together." I paused at the door and looked back at him one final time. "What we had together was a lie, Marcus. You spent 8 years making me feel small while planning to steal everything I worked for. Now you know exactly how small you really are." The last thing I saw before the door closed was Marcus slumped in his chair, staring at the inheritance documents that represented everything he'd thrown away in a fit of rage. Justice had never felt so perfectly served. Marcus signed the settlement agreement at 11:47 p.m. the following night, just 13 minutes before Carmen's deadline expired. He'd spent the entire day desperately trying to find an attorney willing to take his case, only to discover that word of his criminal activities had spread through Millbrook's legal community faster than gossip at a church social. The call came to Elena's apartment, where I'd been sitting with a cup of chamomile tea, reading a book about art collecting that had arrived earlier from one of my inherited properties. Elena was grading papers at her kitchen table when my phone rang with Carmen's number. "He caved," Carmen announced without preamble. Complete capitulation. He signed everything: the divorce agreement, the property transfer, and most importantly, the criminal immunity waiver that prevents him from claiming coercion later. I set down my teacup, feeling a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. After days of strategic maneuvering and building toward this moment, the actual victory felt almost anticlimactic. "What exactly did he agree to?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker so Elena could hear. "Everything we demanded. You get the house free and clear. He's arranging to pay off the fraudulent business loan within 30 days. He keeps his car, his personal belongings, and his debts. He also agreed to pay all legal fees, which, given the complexity of this case, is going to be substantial." Elena looked up from her papers, grinning. "What about the criminal charges?" "Dropped, contingent on his compliance with the settlement, though I made it very clear that any future financial shenanigans will void the immunity agreement immediately." I walked to Elena's living room window, looking out at the city lights of downtown Millbrook. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably sitting in his temporary apartment. He'd been forced to move out of our house immediately upon signing, contemplating how spectacularly his life had imploded. "There's more," Carmen continued. "Trevor Hastings has been fired from Millbrook Commercial Bank and is facing his own legal troubles. Apparently, Marcus wasn't his only client involved in questionable lending practices. The bank is conducting a full audit of every loan Trevor approved in the past 2 years. The domino effect of Marcus's schemes was spreading wider than anyone had anticipated. His arrogance hadn't just destroyed his own life. It had taken down his accomplices as well. "When can I move back into the house?" I asked. "Technically, right now. Marcus removed his belongings this afternoon under supervised conditions. The locks have been changed, and all utilities remain in your name. I had a cleaning service go through the place to make sure he didn't leave any unpleasant surprises." After ending the call with Carmen, I sat in Elena's living room processing what had just happened. 8 years of marriage, dissolved in a week. A man I'd loved and trusted, revealed to be a criminal who'd been systematically planning to destroy me financially. And an inheritance that had transformed me from victim to victor in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. "You're quiet," Elena observed, joining me on the couch. "I thought you'd be more excited." "I am," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "It's just surreal. A week ago, I was clipping coupons and worrying about whether we could afford to fix the car. Now I'm worth $17 million and my husband is facing financial ruin." "Ex-husband," Elena corrected. "Don't forget the ex part." The next morning, I stood on the front porch of my house, holding the new keys Carmen had provided. The Victorian home looked exactly the same from the outside, but I knew everything had changed. This was no longer the marital home Marcus and I had shared. This was my sanctuary, my fresh start, my symbol of justice served. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, immediately noticing the difference. The house felt lighter somehow, as if Marcus's toxic presence had been physically removed along with his belongings. The living room, where he'd delivered his cruel ultimatum just days ago, now seemed peaceful rather than confrontational. In the kitchen, I found a note from the cleaning service detailing what they'd done: deep cleaning, carpet shampooing, even replacing the air fresheners. But more importantly, I found an envelope from Carmen containing documents that made my victory official. The first was the signed divorce decree, which would be filed with the court the following Monday. The second was the deed transfer, making me the sole owner of the property. The third was a restraining order preventing Marcus from coming within 500 feet of the house, my workplace, or Elena's apartment. But the fourth document was, perhaps the most satisfying. A letter from the IRS confirming that Marcus's fraudulent business loan had triggered an audit of his taxes for the past 3 years. His attempts to hide income and manipulate deductions were about to receive federal scrutiny. I spent the rest of the morning walking through each room, reclaiming my space and planning changes. The master bedroom, where Marcus had delivered so many lectures about my inadequacy, would be completely redecorated. His home office, where he'd plotted his financial crimes, would become my art studio, a place to display pieces from my inherited collection. The afternoon brought visitors. First came Elena, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and a huge smile. Then Carmen arrived with final paperwork and updates on Marcus's situation. Finally, Dr. Patricia Hartwell from the law firm that had handled my inheritance stopped by to discuss managing my new wealth. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Dr. Hartwell admitted as we sat in my living room. "Your great-aunt Vivian would be absolutely delighted." She specifically mentioned in her personal notes that she wanted her inheritance to go to someone who would use it to build a better life, not just spend it frivolously. We discussed investment strategies, tax implications, and the various properties I'd inherited. The house in Virginia Beach was a coastal retreat worth $800,000. The North Carolina mountain cabin was valued at $600,000. The Florida condo in a luxury high-rise was worth over $1 million. Each property came fully furnished and maintained by management companies. "The art collection is particularly valuable," Dr. Hartwell explained, showing me photographs of paintings and sculptures stored in a climate-controlled facility in Richmond. "Your aunt had excellent taste and the resources to acquire pieces from some very notable artists. Sotheby's estimates the total value at $2.1 million, but some pieces may appreciate significantly over time." As evening approached and my visitors departed, I found myself alone in my reclaimed home for the first time since this nightmare began. I made myself dinner in the kitchen where Marcus had thrown my sandwich to the floor, ate in the dining room where he'd accused me of lacking ambition, and then sat on the back patio where he'd often criticized my garden as a waste of time and money. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had spent years making me feel small, inadequate, and unsuccessful. He'd thrown me out of our home in a rage, confident that his superior earning power and professional connections would ensure his victory in any divorce proceedings. He'd planned elaborate schemes to steal our joint assets while leaving me with nothing. Instead, his greed and criminal behavior had cost him everything, while I'd emerged from his abuse wealthier and more powerful than he could ever have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I recognized Marcus's writing style immediately. "Sophia, I know I can't contact you directly, but I need you to understand that I never meant for things to go this far. I made mistakes, but I still care about you. Maybe we can find a way to work this out." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Marcus was still trying to manipulate me, still believing he could charm his way out of the consequences of his actions. But that naive woman who might have fallen for his manipulation was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood her own worth, someone who refused to accept less than she deserved, someone who had the resources and determination to protect herself from anyone who tried to diminish her again. The victory was complete, but it was also just the beginning. Tomorrow, I would start building a life that was entirely my own, successful, ambitious, and absolutely anything but ordinary. 6 months later, I stood in the sunroom of my completely transformed home, sipping morning coffee from a hand-thrown ceramic mug I'd purchased from a local artist, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across my flourishing garden. The woman who had cowered under Marcus's verbal abuse seemed like a stranger from another lifetime. The house itself had undergone a metamorphosis that mirrored my own journey. The dark, heavy furniture Marcus had insisted upon was gone, replaced, with pieces that reflected my actual taste: light woods, soft fabrics, and colors that made me smile. The master bedroom now featured walls painted in a calming sage green, with artwork from my inherited collection carefully curated to create a space of peace and renewal. But the most dramatic change was Marcus's former office, which I'd converted into my art studio and sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light, perfect for examining the paintings and sculptures I'd inherited from Aunt Vivian. A comfortable reading chair sat in one corner, surrounded by bookshelves filled with art history texts, investment guides, and novels I'd never had time to read during my marriage. My phone chimed with a text from Elena. Board meeting still on. For this afternoon? Can't wait to hear the foundation update. I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. The Vivian Rosewood Foundation for Women's Financial Independence had been my idea, a way to honor my great-aunt's legacy while helping other women avoid the trap I'd fallen into. Using a portion of my inheritance, I'd established an organization that provided legal aid, financial counseling, and emergency funds for women escaping financially abusive relationships. Elena served as the foundation's education director, developing programs to teach financial literacy in schools and community centers. Carmen Rodriguez had joined our board of directors, offering pro bono legal services to women who couldn't afford representation. Even Dr. Patricia Hartwell had become involved, helping us establish investment strategies that would ensure the foundation's long-term sustainability. The foundation had already helped 12 women in Millbrook County alone, providing everything from legal representation in divorce proceedings to seed money for starting businesses. Each success story felt like another victory against the Marcus Valamonts of the world, men who believed they could control women through financial manipulation and emotional abuse. My own transformation had been just as dramatic as the foundation's. Growth. The timid nurse who had accepted whatever scraps her husband offered was gone, replaced by someone who understood the power of wealth when used wisely. I'd left my position at Millbrook General Hospital after careful consideration, not out of rejection of nursing, but because I could now afford to be selective about how I spent my time. Instead, I'd enrolled in graduate school to pursue a master's in arts administration, combining my love of beautiful things with practical knowledge about managing cultural institutions. My inheritance included not just money and property, but also responsibility for Aunt Vivian's extensive art collection, and I was determined to honor that trust properly. The Virginia Beach House had become my weekend retreat, a place where I could walk on the beach and reflect on how dramatically my life had changed. The North Carolina mountain cabin served as a writer's retreat. I'd begun documenting my story, hoping to help other women recognize the warning signs of financial abuse. The Florida condo I'd decided to sell, using the proceeds to expand the foundation's reach into neighboring counties. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation was professional. Word of my foundation work had spread through Millbrook's philanthropic community, leading to invitations to serve on other boards and committees. The hospital where I'd once worked had asked me to join their board of trustees, recognizing that my experience as both a former employee and a major donor brought valuable perspective. Marcus, meanwhile, had essentially disappeared from Millbrook society. After the divorce, he'd moved to a smaller city 2 hours away, taking a position with a mid-level real estate firm that apparently hadn't done thorough background checks. Trevor Hastings had also left town after his banking license was revoked, though rumors suggested he was working as a car salesman in another state. The Peterson project that had triggered Marcus's initial rage had been completed by another developer, becoming one of Millbrook's most successful mixed-use developments. Occasionally, I drove past it and marveled at the irony. Marcus had destroyed his life in rage over losing a project that his criminal behavior had disqualified him from handling. Anyway, my phone rang, interrupting my morning reflection. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from Marcus's new city. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Sophia?" It's Marcus. His voice sounded older, tired. I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I needed to call. I considered hanging up immediately, but curiosity won out. What do you want, Marcus? I heard about your foundation, the work you're doing for women in abusive situations. He paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. I wanted to apologize, really apologize, not the manipulative garbage I tried before. I moved to my kitchen island, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate care. Go on. I've been in therapy. Court-ordered at first, but I kept going because I needed to understand how I became the person who could treat you that way. His voice cracked slightly. I lost everything, Sophia. My career, my reputation, any chance at the life I thought I wanted. But the worst part is knowing that I hurt someone who never deserved it. The silence stretched between us. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect the peace I'd built from any remnant of his toxicity. But another part recognized that this conversation was important. Not for him, but for my own complete healing. I forgive you, Marcus, I said finally. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger was poisoning my own life. I don't deserve forgiveness, he agreed, but thank you for giving it anyway. And Sophia? What you're doing with the foundation, helping other women, it's exactly the kind of work someone with your heart should be doing. I was too selfish and stupid to see your worth when it mattered. After ending the call, I sat in my kitchen processing the conversation. Marcus's apology felt genuine, but it also felt irrelevant to the life I'd built. His recognition of my worth meant nothing now that I fully understood it myself. A knock at my front door interrupted my thoughts. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck and a young woman holding an elaborate flower arrangement. Sophia Martinez? She asked when I opened the door. Yes, that's me. These are for you, from the Millbrook Arts Council. The card says, "Congratulations on your appointment to the museum board." I accepted the flowers, a stunning arrangement of orchids and roses that would look perfect in my art studio, and read the accompanying card. The museum's board of directors was welcoming me to their ranks, recognizing both my financial contributions and my growing expertise in arts administration. As I arranged the flowers in a crystal vase, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who accepted whatever life handed her, who made herself small to accommodate a cruel husband's ego. Today, I was a philanthropist, a graduate student, a museum board member, and most importantly, a woman who would never again allow anyone to diminish her worth. The inheritance had given me the resources to fight back, but the real transformation had come from within. I'd discovered reserves of strength and determination I never knew I possessed. I'd learned to value myself not through others' approval, but through my own actions and choices. Marcus had thrown me out in a fit of rage, believing he was discarding an obstacle to his happiness. Instead, he'd freed me to become the woman I was always meant to be, successful, ambitious, and absolutely extraordinary. And as I placed the flowers in my sun-filled studio, surrounded by priceless art and infinite possibilities, I knew that my story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.